Okay, and Kelly, so good to see you. I got onto you early in my NDE studying and reading, and yours just hit me. It was just my most favorite one, and it's hard to say that there's a favorite near-death experience because it's kind of a hard thing to explain, but it got me looking at so many others, and Jeffrey Long's site, and I got onto NDE.com and all this kind of stuff. And I've listened to so many over the last, how many months since I've listened to yours. And I just find this topic, and how you got into it is not something to celebrate, but it happened.
Right.
But
right.
This topic is so this is like talking to somebody that has climbed the mountain, got to the other side, and you're ready to climb a mountain. They climbed it, they got to the other side, and they can actually climb back down and tell you what you're in for and what's coming. And I can't think of anything more amazing in life than to have someone who's looked in on the other side. So I'm so happy to have you.
Sorry, that made me a little emotional. That is the sweetest thing.
Oh. Listen, I make most women cry when I talk, so.
My heart is so full these days. I cry all the time, but it's all happy tears, and I felt that. Thank you, Doug. Yeah, thank you all for having me. I'm super.
Well, it's great to have you. Nancy, by the way, is following in line. She's almost ready to cry now. If Nancy starts crying, I'm going to start crying. And
it doesn't take much.
I cry all the time, but I promise it's happy tears. My son's just literally walks around with tissues all the time now because he knows something's going to cause me to cry. But it's just when your heart is so open, you feel things so differently.
So Kelly, because you and I have a relationship going via the email and so on, let me ask this first question. Have you always been like that, or is your emotional state now altered since your experience?
I'm not even remotely the same person. Tastes, who I am, the type of language I use. My sister says, she knew me for the 38 years, obviously. I'm not even remotely the same person. So yeah, very much affected by the shift that happened with my near-death experience. I couldn't even go in my old wardrobe. I was like, whose clothes are these? Because I didn't identify with the flavors, the tastes, the looks, the feels. Yeah, so I've always been sensitive, but this is definitely different. It's a different sensitive.
First?
Yes, I was going to ask that very question and preface it by, I know this is probably not the most fun thing that you have to revisit, but if you could, for us and who will be listening to doing this, could you bring us up to your near-death experience and how we got from normal life to an NDE? How did that go?
Yeah, sure. And, it's really funny. I haven't watched those videos since I recorded them. So I recorded those in 2008, 2009, literally after it happened. I had never used YouTube, and I was brand new to YouTube. So I could only do those little 15-minute clips because I hadn't even been approved to do the longer. And I have not gone back and watched those since. So it's really interesting to me. So much has happened over these years, and the most recent is my birth guide, Bernadette, coming through a lot stronger since all of this pandemic stuff has started happening and really bringing some more things to light based on my near-death experience. So I'm happy to share some of that too. I'm an open book, so please know there's nothing off topic here. There's nothing I find offense to. So feel free to ask any questions. But I'll start where you've asked me to start, which is kind of what led up to that. I was a victim for 38 years. My mindset was always life was happening to me, not for me. And that's very much kind of how this all built up. I went through a really, really painful divorce. I was a single mom all of a sudden with a very young child. picked up and moved to New Zealand all by myself, didn't know anyone over there, from California. And that was just based on a recent divorce. And my ex-husband was from New Zealand. We sat down and said, where's a good place to raise a child by yourself? He said, New Zealand, it's going to be safe. I support it, go. And off I went. And I had just had a major full hysterectomy and lost a child during that, which I didn't share in any of my videos because, you know, it's pretty personal. I probably would share it today, but back then when I did the videos, I think I was still a little cautious about how much I was saying because my son was still quite young. So I'd lost a child, went through a major divorce, had been diagnosed with a bladder cancer that was concerning, and was in a strange country with a little child. And it just was one thing stacking on top of another. And already having the mentality of life happening to me was just a bit too much. And, you know, I just remember starting to plan it. I just remember, I don't think there was any one specific thing. It was just, and I said this to a client the other day, in a diseased mind, which I can't relate to anymore, but in that diseased mind, D, suicide, was always one of my options. I'll either go A, B, C, or D. And D was just always in that option list, which I can't even fathom that today. It would never even be one of my options. But in that mindset, it was kind of like, well, if this don't work, there's always D. And one thing led to another, and D became my option. I started planning. Another thing that I don't share openly that I'll share here today, because again, no concerns about it now that my son's an adult. In my diseased mind, and I find this very interesting, and I was speaking with a counselor who was a client, and I said, in my diseased mind, I thought that suicide was actually the best thing for my son. He would be better without me, that he would be more supported without me. And the day that I knew that this was going to all take place, I wanted family photos because in my diseased mind, I thought he would look back on those and that would be a cherished memory. And now I think, gosh, that's so icky. But in that state, I thought he would have those as a cherished memory, you know, pictures with his mom and beautiful setting. And it's just crazy to me. And I have those photos and I look at them now and, you know, I get chills because I think they had no idea as we're sitting taking these family photos. But I, in my mind, as soon as these photos were over, I was headed to go do what I was going to do. So we lived in New Zealand on a very, very remote little island. I didn't have a place. I just knew that I was going to go somewhere that was remote and have a beautiful view. And I knew that I didn't want to do this somewhere that someone I loved would find me. So I intended to do it outside or in my car. I had been saving and storing medications because I was very depressed and had been seeing a counselor there who kept giving me antidepressants, and I kept explaining I was getting worse, and then they would just give me more, which was making me worse instead of better. And I now know that I'm super sensitive to medication and that antidepressants were just the worst thing for me and probably the final kicker. They had just increased my dose that week, in fact, and I had just started storing away any kind of medications I could find and stopped and got some pre-mixed gin and tonics, which I'm not a drinker, and had the pills, had a pad of paper and a pen to write my notes, and off I went. Off I went. I had my SUV. My son was with my partner at the time and his girls. We were in a blended family at the stage, and I knew he was well cared for. And again, in my mind, I thought he was going to be better off without me. And off I went to do this. And I just remember sitting in my SUV writing my suicide notes and drinking and taking the pills slowly, because I knew that that's what I was supposed to do. Take them very slowly and just very, very carefully do it. And I had a stack of notes, some of which I had written in advance and most of which I had written in the car. And the final note was to whoever the EMT person was that was going to find me, because I felt really horrible about the fact that that was going to be their job. And once I wrote that one and set it on top of the stack and set it in the passenger seat, I could feel the medication and the alcohol had really gotten to my head. I remember getting out of the SUV. I had to use the restroom, and there was a little abandoned building I was able to go over and kind of do that. And then I got back in the SUV in the back of it, and I laid down. And that's when everything started to happen. I remember saying over and over again in my head, being raised Catholic, I know this is something I've been told is a sin, but I also know that whoever this God is loving and forgiving, and I feel that in my heart.
I had a friend take his life, and I don't know, maybe that's why I'm so moved by this topic. He shot himself in the head. And I just need to stop you now, and maybe a few of us also, after I'm done, can ask a few questions, then we'll move on from there.
Yeah.
This is like a major step for anybody. And at the time when you're making that step, there's a point of no return. And I think about that. Like, how does a person cross over to a point of no return where you can't go, oh boy, I want to back this up. I've decided to change my mind. You know, I'm sure that kind of stuff is going on through your head all the time, which is amazing to me. But the one thing I wanted to ask you was, did you have anyone commit suicide in your world prior, in a family member or someone like a friend? Because I remember reading that suicide can be hereditary, because it's almost like a person that has had suicide happen already in their family, that family member has given themselves an option. They've given that person an option that, oh, like, yeah, I never thought that suicide could be an option, but once a friend or a family member takes their life, you now view it as an option. It's like, oh, A, B, C, D, or now E. Wow, that's a new option, rather than fighting through life and going through all its difficulties. So I was just wondering if you ever had, prior to what you've done, did you have anyone close to you commit suicide?
No. And in fact, it's interesting because when I was speaking with my client who's a counselor, and I explained this to her, she works with people who have attempted suicide, and she said, thank you for saying that, because I never would have even thought that. But what's interesting is when we had this conversation, it was just this week, so interesting. I can remember back to college days, option D was always one of my options, which most people don't walk around saying that. And I think you can all kind of recognize that after this call. It's going to kind of ruminate for you, as it did for her, that there are people walking around on this planet and that option is just one of their normal options. And that is part of a diseased mind. And I think if you're a counselor, that's really important to know, whether you're doing spiritual counseling or psychoanalytic counseling, to ask someone not just do you have suicidal ideation, but is suicide one of your life options? So no one in my family, no one close to me, I had never been around suicide. And being raised Catholic, again, it was a very, very strong no. So no, nothing, no exposure at all. I just knew it was a very taboo thing, and then I needed to hide it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. You talked about being a victim. And I say that I was the best victim in the world, because I played that very heavily until recently, just like 10 or 11 years ago or so. And I talk a lot about how that changed my life for the better. So I'd just like to hear from you how releasing the victim vibe changed your life and your reality.
That's a great question. And that's what my birth guide, Bernadette, is now coming through and talking a lot about. So I'm super excited about this. She's taking a stronger role in this whole collaboration, is what you would call it. And literally we just did a live on this last week, which is on my Nurture Your Soul page. So it's fresh, which is really cool that it's coming up. But everything that I was shown on the other side is how subtle of an opportunity we have to notice the shift between victimhood and loving what is. And the subtlety is an energy. Everything's energy, of course, but the subtlety is, the way she explained it literally last Wednesday, is energy is energy. You know, we label it and we categorize some energies this way and that way, but energy is just a flow. And the victim flow builds momentum. The more you feed that dark wolf, right? That dark wolf is the one that's the leader. The more you feed that white wolf, the more that white wolf is the leader. And the subtle shift seems to be a tiny crack of awareness that is always coming from the heart and inviting us back to realization of who we really are. And the more we tap into that, whether it's just taking a breath and checking in and saying, does this feel true? Which a victim thought never will feel true. That's why it feels icky in the body. Or who am I? You know, all of those questions that start the spiritual awakening will continue to expand that space to give an opportunity to realize that that energy can be fed. Even though you may not be believing it in the moment and it feels like you're lying to yourself. And I'm not talking about reframing and doing the whole I'm happy even though I'm not happy dance. I'm saying rest in the dis-ease. That's okay. I can feel dis-ease now and be okay with that, because now I realize the dis-ease isn't here to harm me. It's here to come up and out. It's the willingness to sit with it and be uncomfortable versus wanting it to go away. So a lot of the work that I do with my clients one-on-one is, of course, the mediumship channeling, but in conjunction with, okay, let's talk to your dead aunt, because I know that's important and meaningful to you right now, but let's look at why you think you need your dead aunt to help you understand why you're miserable. Because I can show you that that's not necessary. You can do that for yourself. So the collaboration with Bernadette is building momentum right now. The ability to lean more towards the awareness of life is happening for us. Whether I believe it or not, and the dis-ease seems more prevalent and the life is happening to me seems more realistic, let that exist right now. That's okay. But just have a tiny bit of awareness and openness to the idea that perhaps, just perhaps, this is happening for me. And that'll build momentum, because it's just another energy. The more you feed it, the bigger it gets, etc. I hope I answered that well.
Yes, beautifully. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Okay, if nothing else urgent, Kelly, I'd love to have you go now into how this whole thing, you know, the EMT and where you went from there, and you know, whoever again has a question, put your hand up as we go.
Yeah, so, you know, as I'm laying in the back of the SUV, I just remember saying over and over, and now I realize that it was a form of meditation. I didn't know at the time, am I still breathing? Am I still breathing? Am I still breathing? I kept hearing that in my head because something in me thought, you don't feel anything, you just stop breathing. So I put my awareness on that because there was nothing in me that wanted to be rescued. There was nothing saying call someone. I want to change my mind. You know, Doug, you were asking about that. None of that was going on. Yes, there was empathy for my son. At one point, I recognized that I had left the house and he didn't have his favorite lion. He called it Liony. So I made a quick call back to home to make sure they got Liony for him. And that was the last thing I felt like I needed to do to tie the loop, was he needed to have that lion. I needed to know he had that lion. I'm going to cry. Sorry. Once I knew he had his lion, I just kept saying over and over and over again in my head, am I still breathing? I know God loves me. Am I still breathing? I know God loves me. I know that God is a loving God. I know that God loves me. Am I still breathing? And I just kept listening for that breath. And ironically enough, that's a form of meditation. I didn't know. The next thing I knew was like a pop, and I'm above the car. I'm not in the body. There was no feeling of that. There was no big impact. There was no huge transition. It was just 1 minute asking the question, the next minute above it all, above the SUV, looking in as if there was no top to it, with zero identity to the thing it was looking at. And that's literally how it felt, the thing it was looking at. There wasn't even a that's the body, or that's the Kelly, or that's the me. There was none of that. There was no sensitivity to it. There was no drive to save it. There was no, compassion or worry about it. It was just, look at that thing. Isn't that interesting? And, to this day, when I think about that moment, I recognize that is so natural for us. And that's why we just don't have an awareness that we do that all the time, right? In that moment, we call it an NDE, but, I now know we do that every night. We do that every time we lay down to go to sleep. In fact, we're rebirthed and dying every moment, every second. So it is that natural. And that's why there was no inquiry about it. There was just a look at that thing, writhing, seeming to be uncomfortable, seeming to be struggling, but there was no need to rescue it. There was no need to stop it. There was no strong pull to go back to it. There was also no strong pull to get away from it. It was just look, curiosity. And then there was this sensation, for lack of, you guys know from watching my video, it's really hard to put words to a lot of this. So I'm really careful when I talk about this of saying the human words will never point to any of this, but I do the best that I can. There was a sensation of a pull, and popping and crackling sounds, none of which were scary and none of which felt needed to be resisted. And the next thing I know, just this pulling sensation, and I'm in darkness. But there was no fear. And there was no, this is scary. Why am I in darkness? Am I in hell? Have I gone to purgatory? There was none of that. In fact, I don't recall having thoughts in that space. I just felt held and loved. We call it darkness, the abyss, nothingness. To me, I was held. I was held, and nothing was holding me. It was just bliss. And no desire to go anywhere from there. No, I need to get somewhere else, or, oh my gosh, I thought I'd see a God, or I thought I'd see an angel, or I thought I'd see my grandmother. None of that, just acceptance and peace. And then again, more popping, cracking. Again, no concept of time or how long I was in that space of nothingness. Pulling sensation. And then this beautiful pink that I've never experienced. And I try so hard to find it again when I'm astrally moving about, or I'm even doing my artwork. You just can't recreate that. Smells I've never smelled, which I liken to gardenias, but again, not even that. And sounds, vibrancy, feelings I've never experienced. Again, nothing here can even point to it, not even close. And I wasn't experiencing them, I was them. So this is really hard for people who have never had an NDE to understand, and I try really hard. The closest thing I can really point to it, because I think all of us have had this experience. For me, it's near water, for whatever reason. I'm just very drawn to water, but I've had many experiences throughout my life where I've been out on a boat, or I've been out on a raft, or I've just been floating, and I feel like I've become the water. There's no Kelly and then water, or Kelly boat water. There's just this. And that's the closest I can get to telling you how that felt. I wasn't seeing pink. I wasn't smelling smells. I wasn't hearing sounds. I was them. And as I thought about that, more of that came. I became the pink, bigger. It felt like I was expanding, like I had been shoved in a little tiny can of sardines, and this energy was just opening up fully. And that didn't happen in the darkness. It happened once I exploded into this pink. And all of a sudden, there was just this beautiful awareness that I was all of it. And so loved. So I'll pause there for a second and see if anyone has any questions so far.
As an artist, Kelly, and all of us can see color. None of us are colorblind, to my knowledge. I don't think anyone in our group here is colorblind.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say I am colorblind.
Oh, okay. So that's...
I mean, I see color. Everything looks fine to me. But when they give me the test with those little pizzas and you're supposed to see a number or a letter or something in them, there's nothing there. So
the point about color is, if you are colorblind and then you see color, you're shifting into like a paradigm shift. Well, my knowledge of color, every color of the spectrum made out of all the primaries and everything, if you were to tell me there's a new color, I can't conceive of it. It's absolutely impossible to conceive of.
Yeah, I know that you experience color that I can't and never will. And that's an interesting thing for me.
Well, I'll throw in another interesting paradigm at you. And I was having this I do a lot of work with young teens, at-risk youth and stuff. And one of the teens popped by the other day, and we were sitting outside looking at a beautiful cherry tree I have in my front yard where my hummingbirds come, and I sit with them all the time. And I looked at her and I said, "What do you see?" And she said, "Just a lot of green, beautiful green right now with all the rain we've had." And I said, "How do you know you're seeing green?"
Yeah.
You call it green and I call it green, but we don't know that we're seeing the same thing, right?
True.
So I think that's the way to relate. Our linear brains want to tap into things that have been labeled, and it's the unlabeling that actually gives us the experience of enjoyment. And that's kind of what I work towards helping people see. And I say it all the time. It's like the finger pointing to the moon. We get caught up in that finger and we miss the moon. There's so many fingers. That's what this experience is, right? Duality is just fingers. Remove the dualistic component and what's left is nothingness, which is what I experienced. What we all experience. Many beautiful things happened. You know, to this day, I'm still getting downloads because I think so much happened that I couldn't come back with all of it. And like I said, just literally last week found out a huge thing, which is my birth guide, Bernadette, and I actually overlapped an incarnation in New Zealand, and I didn't even know that before I committed suicide. So we can loop back around on that if we have time, but there was a realization that, again, thought is the only word I can use, but there was no thinking I needed to be anywhere. There was just this realization that there was more to see and more to do. No language or hearing of voices. Everything was known. We call it telepathy, but it was just known. Really connected to Archangel Gabriel for whatever reason, played a big significant part in this near-death experience, and to this day does. I call on Archangel Gabriel all the time for healing work, Archangel Michael. And again, I think a lot of that parlays with the way I was raised in Catholicism and my, my love of Mother Mary and Medjugorje and all of these things translate. And what I was shown after my near-death experience is that many people who have near-death experiences will experience what they expect simply because it's something that will allow them to feel comfortable in the experience of you're all of this. It's almost like a transitional segue or a grace of God that says you still need some aspects to believe because the concept of you being all of this is still a little bit too much to swallow. So I feel like I needed to gently be brought through this process with the idea that there were others guiding me, finger pointing to moon, without going directly to you are the moon. I don't know if that's because I was intended to come back and there was some intellectual property they wanted me to bring back with me, and it doesn't matter. I've never actually asked. I'm sure if I asked, I would get that download. But there was just a realization that I had guidance. I now realize I don't need that guidance, but it's really cool to know that I have it. And it's interesting that it's coming more prevalent again now that Bernadette's very actively engaging with me again. So Archangel Gabriel became part of the experience. There was just this, kind of come kind of thing. Again, no, and there was no need for me, it's not like I'm flapping wings or, I'm walking. It was just an energy of come, go. And there we were. No experience of movement, like from point A to a point B. There was just a whoosh. And here we are looking at review of the life, which was just seconds. It was just seconds. And, I was 38 years old and I was told or knew this is my whole experience flashing before my eyes. And it was beautiful. I wasn't shamed. There was no, this is sinful. These are the bad things you did. It was just every single experience trickling, seconds, all of it. And a knowing that this, that feels very heavy and long and burdensome and victim-y and 38 years of just this and that and the other was seconds. Just a snap. So I'll pause there.
Kelly, I just want to mention something to you quickly before I forget. There's a Dr. Ravji Party, MD. I don't know if you know that name, Party. Okay. He wrote a book called Dying to Wake Up. Here is a person with a completely different religion than you, and he met the archangels. He speaks about it in his book. He said, I think he said he met Archangel Michael and Gabriel. And he said it was crazy to him that he met them, but his religion was not a precursor or a condition to meet them. And I just wanted to put that in there before I forgot.
That's interesting. Very good to know. Thank you.
I just wanted to say I read Dr. Partey's book too, and it was really a revelation that this guy who was kind of a cold fish of an anesthesiologist and kind of a, not a real warm figure with his patients, comes back and has all of this empathy and love and understanding that he didn't have before, and this understanding that money wasn't the end all. And I just thought that was just fascinating that he had this epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask just one question? Whenever you, at the point that you lost consciousness and you felt that pull, was there a sense of satisfaction in any way? Or was
No,
it a neutral, here I go?
very, very neutral. That's a great word, actually. Because it wasn't numb. It wasn't detached. It was neutral. It's a great word.
Kelly, well, two very quick questions. One, did you have a body?
No.
Okay. And two, it's interesting that when you had this life review, as they call it, and you saw that sometimes you weren't being nice to somebody and you had no reaction to it, totally neutral. So on earth, we like to think that when someone's a jerk to us and they die, they know it and they know the truth. And you're saying that doesn't happen.
No, because what I was shown and what I've continued to build off of in awareness since that time is I'm all of this. So if I even remotely think Hitler or Trump or anyone that we would, potentially put in a bucket of a bad person, then I'm basically casting out a part of this godness. No, we seem to be the ones that need the identification of duality. That's not the reality at all. I'm all of this. I am God's source. I am the eyes. Like, I don't know if you guys have noticed, if you watch any of my recent videos, I refer to this as the story of Kelly. There's not an identity of a person here anymore. There's just these eyes seeing this meat suit do these things that are fun. We call them experiences, and they're not right, wrong, good, bad. Duality isn't the truth. There's nothing dualistic. So what could be sin? What could be wrong? What could be cast away? The jerk is an opportunity to look at something thriving as a story inside of myself. And there's an opportunity to unravel that for myself and for the world. And I do that. I'm constantly cleaning. And not my stuff that I'm cleaning. It's just, I think of it as, well, there it is. Let's vacuum it up. So, no, the jerk that cuts me off in traffic is an opportunity to embrace and love myself even more.
Kelly, that's a fantastic thing that I'll be very honest about. I have a hard time wrapping my head around. I guess I'm so, we're all so ironed into this low vibrational, dimensional brownie of life, like a thick brownie, rather than a sponge cake. It's like a brownie. And, you want to say that guy that just kicked that dog is like someone you want to go out and kill, because anybody that threatens an animal to me is like the bottom line. I can't stand that they're innocent, or the rude and impersonal things that people do to each other, not to even mention the heinous acts that happen in this world that are hard to wrap your head around. And yet you're kind of explaining that is an aspect and a fractal or all of me too. So there's only, because you said in one of your videos, and it's always been hard for me to understand when you say, there is nobody out there. Can you explain a little bit of what you mean by there is nobody out there?
The closest I can get to putting words to it is I am all of this, and by default, I'm unzipped and turned inside out, so I am by default none of this. Let me say a little bit more. Everyone's looked at a mirror, right? We all have them hanging around our house. Move away from the mirror and look at the mirror. What does the mirror see? Right? So to know itself, it needs what? A reflection. That reflection then gives it an opportunity to say, I am a girl. I have a nose. I have these arms. I am this body. And then it gets to identify with something. And that is what God's source needs, because as God's source, which we are all, I can't know any of it if I'm all of it. If I'm all of it, how do I get to experience any of it? Right? So to be all of it, I want to know what it feels like to feel. Well, I can't feel because I'm all of it. So to know love, I must know hatred. To know kindness, I must know lack of kindness. To know regret, I must know joy. You know, there's a dualistic component to everything. So what I say to my clients is, if you can find a dualistic component, it's not true. Bring me something you can't find a dualistic component to, and then we'll have a conversation. And that usually starts the unlearning process for them. And they'll get very frustrated at first. They'll get excited that they found something that doesn't have a dualistic component. They'll bring it to me, and I'll work with them on it and say, let's go over that a little bit. I don't guide them to it, because that's, again, finger pointing to moon, and I am them. So as they're sitting in front of me and we're having the conversation, I am that aspect. There's something here that still believes the story that is not known. And until that story is let go for what appears to be a them, it's still thriving in what appears to be a me.
Well, you said something at the beginning, which is kind of a mantra to me, which is you're either letting life happen to you or it's happening through you. You're the responsible for it or you're not. And there's really no in between. And I think that's the most important question that we all have to come to, because if we take the victim route, then that's a fork of another road. And if you take the route that you are in control, that you had pre-planned a great deal of your physical reality, the experiences that you're having, that's in a different, totally opposite direction. And while you answer that question, whether it's at the beginning of your life or the middle, or as I got more toward my older years and I started coming up with answers to that question, it takes you in a completely different path, and you can jump that path, and it in a heartbeat. It just takes a decision that you have to make. Say, well, doggone it, why don't I try being responsible for what I am doing? How does that work? How do I create physical reality? What's the operational mechanism? And you start down that road, and you end up with an entirely different experience as you found. And I guess the question I would have is it fair to say that prior to your near-death experience and then after your near-death experience, you were two different individuals, but basically you jumped the roads. You went from victimhood to victimless.
Yes and no. So this has been a process. So there's two things I want to say to that, and I don't want to forget, so you guys remind me if I only say one. I probably should have brought a notepad so I could jot things down, but first off, it's life is happening to me or for me. Okay, so that's a real big distinction, but it's so subtle. It's so subtle. And I'll say more to that as we move along. You'll hear me kind of keep pointing back to that, because that is truly the message, and it's so subtle. Obviously, things built up for me to commit suicide, and yet I'm back in the body, and I return to the same life that I just tried to escape from, and yet I'm in euphoria. I'm wanting to run through the hospitals, hugging everyone, so in love with everything. But life didn't just become euphoric at that point. There still seemed like the character of Kelly was now chasing what I call the dragon and wanting to recreate that euphoria. For a few weeks, I was in such a high vibration. Literally, the walls were molecules. I was putting notepads on the walls documenting that, the bumblebees were speaking to me, and they were cherubs, and, just so much coming through that I just couldn't get it all out fast enough. And my partner at the time said, if everything you were saying didn't make so much sense, I would have thought you had literally broken your brain here, you know, but everything you were saying, like, I literally demystified the whole law of attraction, which I had watched the movie before my near-death experience. And I was like, this is the part they missed putting in the book, which is the most important part. And, you know, literally Post-its all over the walls, paper all over the walls, my dead uncle telling me stuff. I mean, it was crazy. But after a few weeks of that, when the body started to normalize, there was still some, you know, some big stuff to work through, and that has continued to be a shedding process. So I don't want anyone to think that I just immediately came back enlightened with all of these ideas. It's been an erosion is a good way to explain it. And I think what is different is there was always a knowing from that moment forward that everything I had believed as Kelly was a lie. So that awareness was always percolating in the background, capturing the "this is happening to me" thoughts, making them so uncomfortable that I couldn't sit with them. They had to be reviewed. They had to be unlearned. They had to be looked at. That's what I think is the differentiator. I hope that makes sense. And how that happens, that's again some of the tools Bernadette's now coming through and offering. It is that subtle crack in the sidewalk, that little tiny speck of light that we each seem to get, which makes us uncomfortable in the body when we believe the thought that that's a bad person kicking the dog, or that person should go to hell. Something in us, there's an internal knowingness, and I don't care how you've been raised, if you're agnostic or any of that, there's an internal GPS that says, is that true? That links us back to that subtle crack of opportunity to say, there I am being that. There I am being that. If I look in that person's eyes and I see the evil, but I stay there and I stay there and I stay there and I stay there, all I can see is my God self. That meat suit fades away, and the connection where there's non-duality, no non-duality, wholeness, exposes itself. We've all had it looking in a mirror. Again, stare into those eyes. Stare, stare, stare. And this goes away, and it's freaky. I work with clients on this all the time and say, just stay there. What happens? This goes away. So we need the duality for experience, but we don't need the duality for knowingness. Knowingness will unravel that and allow the self to be the witness to the character without an identification of Kelly being good, bad, right, or wrong. Kelly still gets mad. Kelly still loses her temper. Kelly still goes into moments of sadness. Those things haven't gone away. What's gone away is that is me. There is an actress playing a part, and there's a witness watching it. And what tends to happen now is the connection between the self and the Kelly, and the laughter between the two, and saying, I see you, you slippery little sucker, and it lets go. Does that make sense?
Sure. A lot of the things that Kelly has said has been written about in many books, both near-death experiencers, Dr. Alexander, Proof of Heaven. He ended up in a black place for a while before he called for help, and he was brought out of it and had his journey. Anita Morjani, she writes Dying to Be Me, which maybe somebody might be familiar with, very descriptive tale of the other side when she died years ago. And some of the common denominators are such as, when they come back, when you came back, Kelly, you were a changed person. These people they're more giving, more altruistic. Some of them have healing abilities. And I want to know later what you're doing now since 2008 in that way. You talk about your work now, but I don't know what your work is. Are you a healer, a mental healer, a physical healer? But I don't want to get into that yet. What I want to ask you about your map. You described going to a room, and I believe you said it was a stone table. And that just struck me as curious, but that table had on it what what I think is either your pre-life plan
Mhm.
or the actual occurrences, all the occurrences that you experienced in this lifetime. Was it a pre-life plan, or was it everything that Kelly lived up to that time that you saw on that table?
It was all of it.
Okay, so if it
Call
was
it Yeah, I mean, we want to see linear again. We want to see something flat that feels like it's, written down and it's a plan, because the mind can't conceive of what I saw. But if you think of it in a dimensional capacity, I wasn't seeing words. I was looking down
Right.
on all aspects of Kelly, which I'm all of.
right, so that was the plan that you had set before you incarnated. This is what you were going to live. Now, was there a future in that plan, or did that plan stop at your suicide attempt? Was there suicide planned before you died? And that sounds stupid, but your grandfather abusing you was planned. He's in your soul family. You both planned that for the benefit of he or you, I'm not sure, but it was a plan. So was the suicide a plan? And the question I'm going to lead to is, if it was a plan and you followed your plan, where was free will in that plan?
Okay, so this is one that some people get challenged with, but I've been told to stay firm on this because it's part of my message that's meant to get through. This is what is supposed to come through. I was shown there is no free will. And I love that science is finally catching up with this. In fact, if you haven't watched Dr. Joe Dispenza's recent Rewired on Gaia, get a 7-day free trial and watch it, because he does the best job I've seen of taking you the first 3 segments very scientifically through how the brain works. He does the best job I've seen. That science is finally catching up with the idea that, well, maybe you're not making that decision actually. Maybe the brain already knows the decision. And that's what I was shown. We're constantly offered, do you want coffee or tea? Would you like chocolate or vanilla? We think we're making the real-time decision, but the brain actually knows multiple seconds that they can prove scientifically before we make the choice that the choice was already made. And that pisses people off. But the gift in that is this map is doing itself. Let's go back to how that would play out. I'm all of this. I have never been separate. I believe myself to be separate. I'm a girl. My name is Kelly. I was a victim for 38 years. Now I'm not. That's the character. The eyes that seem to be watching this, or the one that seems to be curious about it, is the allness. It's never been separate. What would it need a will to do? It's all of it playing out. The linear mind can't conceive of that. We call it a past and a future, and I reincarnated and I did this. No, I'm all of this. So that map that we looked at on the table in the stone room that wasn't linear was the many aspects seeming to be down in the play. I mean, I even visualize them like little puppeteers, but they're not, because that seems very callous. But to me, it's funny because that's what I conceive it as now. The gift and realization that there's no free will is the freedom or the liberation that we're all seeking. I can't make a mistake here. The character, the meat suit's going to get mad, or it's not, or it's going to harm, or it's not, or it's going to love, or it's going to be hateful, or it's not. Look at it go. Look at it go. God, the energy of all of it, isn't attached to the dualistic ideas that it's right or wrong. God's just like, that's amazing. Bravo. Let's do that. Let's try that. Let's have that. Experiencing, I call it.
Right. You're here to experience. And that's what you made a point of. You came to experience, and that's all you came to do is experience. But
Your only role here is to breathe and not resist.
okay, who is benefiting from that? And I'll get to the point in a second. If we are all one, and the theory is billions of years ago we all split off from the all, and the all is an ocean, and we're drops from that ocean, and we split off, and we want to get back to the ocean, but we're here to experience, as you say. Who are we experiencing for? Are we experiencing for ourselves, or are we experiencing for the benefit of the all, for the all to go through what it feels like to commit suicide, or to have a child, or to jump? Is it for our benefit to feel that and know that, or is it for the benefit of the all to understand that?
You know, you pose the question in an interesting way, and I don't want to sound like I'm being lackadaisical in my response, but I want to be very clear. The only thing that needs a benefit is an ego, right? An ego needs to know that it benefits something. If I'm all of it, I'm all of it.
Mm-hmm.
There is no benefit. There is no lesson. There's no teaching. There's no, I need this to get to that. I'm all of it. So what is the purpose? It's joyous. Right now, it may not feel joyous, but let me relay this in a way I said to somebody the other day. And I think I may have pointed to this in one of my videos. We've all had the experience of watching something in the wild. It was a couple years ago. I was sitting on my back deck having my coffee, and I saw a cat watching a bird. Beautiful cat, neighbor's cat. And we've all seen those cats when they're hunting. They're gorgeous. Just the whole stance that they take, and their back going up, and the arch, and the ears, and there's beauty in that. And this gorgeous bird, unaware it's being stalked and watched. And in that moment of inspiration, that cat leaps, and the bird is in the mouth, and the feathers are crushing. And the human mind says, oh, that's heartbreaking. And yet there's something in us that says, but look how beautiful it is. All the aspects of it are beautiful, if I don't identify with it being right or wrong, right? So what benefits or what gets that? We all do. If we let go of the identity of it being good or bad or right or wrong, we can see beauty and love in all of it. So it is about recognizing that to know this, to know all of this, I seem to have to be separate from it in some capacity to see in the mirror. Sure.
All right.
So the stone room that you alluded to, the experience of being with what I refer to as Jesus, and having that recognition that I was to follow, and there was more to know. That's continued to build as well, even after returning to the physical body, the encounters and the visitations, for lack of a better word, the relationship with Mother Mary, the intensity of the eyes, all of those things, Archangel Gabriel, all of those have continued to feed into this journey of Kelly. I can't remember how much of that I touched on in those original videos, because again, I've never gone back and rewatched them. So if you have specific questions about any of that, feel free to ask. But I think the most prevalent thing I can say is the ultimate message that I knew was coming through, and again, not identifying with the idea that I had to go back being a here and a there, was just that I was tremendously loved. That was the continuous realization for me in this time, was that you can do no wrong, you are loved, you are held, you are supported. Yes, this is the truth. No, it doesn't have to suffer. You don't have to suffer. Yes, this message can be known by all. Yes, this can be experienced and is experienced throughout your entire what appears to be separation. And by the way, you can live this. You can live this. You can live this. You are infinite wisdom. You are infinite knowing. What I've learned in being back in the body is whenever I say no to something, the download comes. Somebody had asked, what are you now? I'm all of it. If someone asks me if I'm a medical intuitive, yes. Can you channel a dead person? Yes. Do you have that information? Yes. Yes is the only answer, because it's not Kelly. It's not Kelly. I used to pinch it off with my response of no, when I came back and was thrust into doing mediumship work because a dear friend said, my friend came back, she had a near-death experience, she seems to talk to people on the other side. All of a sudden, Nurture Your Soul is birthed, and I'm talking to dead people all the time, and I'm translating information. Are you a medical intuitive? I would say no. The next day, there's the information. So I've stopped saying no. The answer is yes. What do you need? How can I help? I'm just the microphone. I don't identify with this being anything to do with me. It's not of me. It's not mine. It's not special. It's not something that was gifted to me. There is just nothing that says no, blocking it anymore. So in the experience on the other side, just continued reinforcement or encouragement that, and I now know, not knowing in that space that, well, you're going back. There was just a pep talk, it was like, okay, this is what happened. This is what was supposed to happen. This was part of your soul map. You're not a sinner. There is no punishment here. Look how loved you are. Look at all these things that happened, and you were loved throughout all of them, and there was nobody up here judging that, and we still aren't. We being the collective, all of it. My, at that point, 6-year-old son is now presenting to me as a 21-year-old. Mom, I still need you. Back in the body. Back in the body. And couldn't walk at first. The legs didn't want to work. The things didn't want to do the things. Realization of what had happened. I had one of my favorite pillows from the house, and somehow that had gotten to the floor, and somehow I had obviously gotten sick, and all of the pods from the pills were on that pillow. I had obviously gotten sick, and you could see that I had absorbed all the medication, and so they couldn't pump my stomach or anything. I mean, it had absorbed. At this point, the EMTs are there. They're getting me out of this SUV. They're putting me in a helicopter because we're on this remote island, and they're telling me my vitals and asking if I'm okay. And I'm euphoric already. I'm confused, but I'm euphoric. And next thing I know, I'm in the emergency room, and all the things are happening. And now angels, dead people, the strange occurrences that I now think of as, angels coming into the space in the ER, and me wanting to get up and run through and hug everybody and tell them how loved they are. And this is the most amazing thing. And yet an awareness. And now I know Bernadette saying, don't tell them, they'll lock you up. And New Zealand's a crazy place, at least back then, because they literally only kept me that one night. And then the next day let me get on a water ferry of all things, all by myself, which if I was still suicidal and playing a game, obviously I could have jumped right off the back of that. So to this day, I think that's kind of ironic and no coincidence. But yeah, I mean, just not even the same person. I was just euphoric and full of vibrancy and life. So I'll pause there.
Kelly, before you go further, I just want to jump back to before you came back into the body. When you see anybody, when you see a grandmother or a deceased person, or Angel Michael or Gabriel, when you say you see them, do you see them as the way we know seeing through our eyes? Do you actually see them? Are they there? Are there people? And my sister always goes, I don't want to die and then mom, I can't see mom's body. Like if I'm on the other side, I want to see mom. I want to see the real mom, not like some ghosty kind of idea of mom. So how do you explain what you mean by perception of individual people over there?
That's a great question. So when this first happened, it was very much like I see you right now. You know, they were, to me, visually right there. Like there was a part of me that wanted to reach out and touch Bernadette because that's how visually real she was to me in the room. Now I don't need that. But then I did, obviously. Training wheels, I call them.
Is this before you came back into the body? I'm talking about before you came back into the body, because I know those videos talk about it before, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, the way Jesus appeared, the way Gabriel appeared was not a hard body like we think of here, and not like they appeared to me when I was in the ER. It was like moving art is the best way I can describe it. So Gabriel to me was like a painting that moved. Yeah, there was no edges. It's so hard to explain, but just this, imagine, especially you, Doug, you can probably conceive of this because your brain probably goes there when you're doing your art, but imagine, I think the closest thing that comes to it is the 3D cartoons they have now, the anime, that sometimes you look at it and you go, oh my gosh, it's so dimensional. And I almost feel like I could walk around my TV and see the back side of that lion, or, you know, these new videos they're coming out with for Disney where like the Lion King, where you're just like, wow, that's so dimensional. But obviously not cartoon colors. Like for Gabriel, it just felt like moving art as I saw Gabriel, and to this day I can see it, you know, waving the hand to follow. It was like a painting that just morphed molecules.
Wow.
Not a hard thing like we think of it, but definitely wanted me to see the experience of it. But I also now know that was for me. It wasn't necessary. So again, the work that I do now, where I speak to dead people, whether you call it channeling or mediumship or psychic abilities, I don't need to see them anymore. But what I find interesting is when I'm sitting with a client is I'll say, your grandmother's here and she's presenting to me as a 30-year-old woman when she loved her hair, and this is what it looks like, and she wants you to know that. And they'll just be like, oh my gosh, that's her. Or they'll pull a picture out and I'll go, yep, that's her. But I'm not seeing it. It's a knowing, because I don't need to see it anymore. It just, the information is just a download.
Al? Thank you, Kelly. Thank you. That was great.
Before I ask you about your 3 angels in the hospital and your interpretation of that, I want to ask you about what the doctor asked you. When he asked you, are you seeing things? I think that is either a question out of experience or intuition, because you were NDE and he probably knows that. So I wonder if that question he asked, he would ask any NDE patient because of his experience with NDE patients having the ability to see things like you were seeing. I mean, he asked you a very pertinent question, and you were experiencing exactly what he asked you. Or it was just a question of somebody who took an overdose of the drug. And that's why he asked that question. It's still, your brain is still firing in so many ways that it's drug-induced. So do you think it was the drug-induced question he's asking you, or his experience with NDEs that brought that question to you from him?
So I now believe that he was me,
Okay.
right, as part of the mirror. But I hadn't identified with that yet. So again, I know it's hard to conceive of, but we think of it as a him and a me. But the reality was he was my mirror in that moment. And in that moment, there was an opportunity for me to start to recognize that you're different. You need to accept that. This apparent doctor who's showing up as an actor in your play is pointing to that. You're different.
Right.
And Bernadette is showing up to build trust with you, to say, there's not everybody in the world's going to accept this new version of you. And all of that was playing out.
Okay. All right.
Absolutely. There's doctors who are more open than others.
Sure.
But again, I think that the Buddha sits in our feet right when we're ready to have the
Right.
teaching. And I
True.
think in that moment, he was my Buddha.
It's funny you say that, because I've got a book here written by the Dalai Lama. The Book of
No
Joy.
coincidence. Yeah.
No coincidences.
None. I laugh and joke, and I hope I won't offend anyone, but my favorite saying is, you just can't make this shit up.
I'm so offended. Oh my, I got to cut that out. That's the word shit I heard. Wow. Kelly, maybe you should just keep going and tell us the rest of the story. We're moving along nice. I could see we could easily have you back and you just keep going on this. It's so good. But go right ahead.
Yeah, it's fun. I'd love to come back and chat with you guys. So yeah, I mean, the three angels, again, you just can't make this stuff up. I mean, there was just this knowingness of euphoria and acceptance that I'm in the hospital. There was no drive to have to get out of there. And I was just so excited to be alive. I didn't care if they poked me, prodded me. The buzzing was still very much happening. The high pitch crackling and popping was still happening. At that point, there was still a question thriving in the Kelly story. Did you damage your brain? Like, are you crazy? But there was just too much love in the room with the angels and the guides and the presence of being held, that story just couldn't thrive there. It was just enjoy it. Just enjoy it. So the first angel was in the ER itself. And, you know, in those ER rooms, it's very different. The cot is kind of not the nicest. You're just behind a curtain and it's very noisy and there's a lot going on. And I just wanted to get up and run through the hallways and hug everybody, because I knew that there were people around me that were very sick, and I just felt this need to heal them. So I kind of can remember laying there and sending healing to each of the people in that area while I was waiting for the next thing to happen. At this point, my partner, who's home with the kids, is on the other side, and there's no ferries to get over to me. And we had both spoken on the phone and agreed we didn't want him bringing the kids over to the ER. And so I just said, stay there. I'm fine. To this day, I don't know how he was okay. I mean, we're still very close, but obviously not in a relationship anymore. And I just can't even fathom what he must have been going through. And he really contained it quite well. But I didn't need anybody. I didn't feel a need for anybody to come sit with me or rescue me. And I think he could hear that in my voice. I'm fine. I'm okay. I really am. I'm not going to harm myself. I'm okay. And they're taking care of me. And so there was just this desire to heal people. And I can remember sitting there thinking, there's gifts out of this that you're going to get to use. And this is fun. And this is going to be exciting. And you don't need to know what all that is right now. Just relax into this moment. And that was the first conceivable realization that this moment was the most important, which is, of course, built over the last 12 years. The Kelly mind wanted to rush ahead of what to do with it. And there was just this breathe and don't resist. I kept hearing it over and over, and the wall was just molecules. If I laid back in the cot, the whole ceiling would just disappear right out of the body again. So that kind of carried on. And the next thing I kind of knew was there was a lot of rambunctiousness going on in the ER. I heard those metal trays getting knocked over, and there was a gal who obviously was on some kind of drugs or something. She was out of her mind, literally. And I hear what I think was her boyfriend or husband saying, no, no, no. And next thing I know, she's like over me in my cot and in this stumbled kind of stupor and what looked like a drug-induced behavior. She kind of leans over me and looks me in the eyes. And the Kelly today would be freaked out because she was obviously out of her mind on something. And it was almost demonic looking the way her body was moving. And I now know it was probably crack cocaine or meth or something because of the way her body was moving. But in that moment, our eyes locked. And I just knew she was an angel. And she said, I see you. And there was just this complete connection. And I just felt chills. And I was like, okay. I don't know what to say about that other than I feel like that was another download. It was just another, for lack of a better word, validation. This isn't over. We didn't dump you back down there and say, go figure it out. We're going to be around. And not only are we around, we're not separate from you. You're going to try and forget that, but we're not going to let you. And they were sealing that deal. So they try to find a place for me, and the hospital was so full. They were finding a struggle of where to put me, which again, I think is so hilarious because here I've committed suicide and they're strolling me up at this time. It's very late at night and nobody's telling me where they're taking me, and nor am I asking. But as they're rolling me up in this cot, I see the on the wall infectious disease. And the next thing I know, I'm taken into one of those little curtained rooms in a room of, I think it was 6 or 8 of us, middle of the night. Everybody's already asleep except for me. They kind of just roll me in with my IV and dump me and say, get some rest. Are you hungry? Do you need anything? Nope, I'm good. Get some rest. And the next thing I know, I just hear some really god-awful sounds coming from the right of where I was laying. And it literally sounded like somebody was drowning in their own stuff. And she was. I mean, she had cystic fibrosis. I didn't know what that was at the time. I'd never even heard of it. So for hours, I would hear her like kind of choking on her own fluids, and the nurses would get the bell and they would come in and help drain her. And she was in a really, really sick state. I would say acute care would have been more appropriate for what she was going through. And again, there was just this feeling of I need to heal her. So in that moment, just loving her so deeply, so deeply. And as that love was emanating between the two of us, at some point, I do remember her getting some peaceful sleep. Again, I don't take credit for that at all. I know that was God energy and the ability for us to connect. I just remember feeling the Kelly being a little scared, kind of like a little girl, felt uncomfortable. It felt cold at this stage, and I felt alone. And I remember I finally got up and my legs felt pretty good at this point. And obviously the drugs had started to leave my system, and they had done all of the blood work to make sure my liver was okay, which is crazy. That how I didn't harm myself, I don't know, but well, of course we know. I get up and I find what I would call the visitor's room or the guest room. And I curled up in a ball on the couch there, and it was cold. I remember a few nurses popping in and asking if I was okay. And to this day, again, I think it's a little ironic that I've committed suicide and I've got so much freedom. I could have left the hospital. I could have really gone anywhere. Not anybody really tracking me, or I wasn't really on suicide watch. I mean, it was just a freedom. And carry on into the morning. There was, ended up back in that room. And again, hearing some really strange sounds coming from across on the other side over to the right, knowing that there's something also odd going on over behind that curtain, and a real draw to heal that. Heavy breathing, hard time breathing, several times throughout the night where, again, a button must have been pushed, nurses coming in, working on that patient, which at that time I didn't know was severely obese. Woman who was having a hard time breathing. Looked like, the next day I saw, almost elephantitis of certain parts of her body. She was so obese. And I imagined probably couldn't walk and probably had to be completely brought in. And then knowing that I needed to help her in some way. And so just again, this feeling of healing. I see you, I know you're there. Connection, even though I'm not at all aware of what's behind that curtain, yet completely aware and aware that that's where the love needed to be, sent. And at some point, again, I feel like she was able to get some rest. So I think at some stage of the night, we all got a little bit of sleep. And the next morning, as the lights come up and they start to come in and the movement of the hospital gets busy, and we all know this. I mean, all night they're coming in and checking your stats, and they're opening curtains and changing IVs and all that's going on. But in the morning, when they finally came in and started pulling the curtains back for all of us, there's this realization of what was behind the curtains for them and for me. I'm sure they were surprised to see me sitting there too. Yeah, and just the opportunity to have that I see you moment with both of those women. And I can't even remember exactly how it played out with each of them, but just this awareness that they were almost thanking me for that bit of peace that they were able to have. And yet they weren't separate from me. I call them earth angels, but really they were just a part of or an aspect of myself that needed to be loved. I can't breathe. I can't swallow, I can't walk, whatever it was in that moment was healed and loved.
But like when you see people that today now removed from this circumstance, do you see people you feel sorry for? Do you see people that oh my God, that poor thing? And that shifted for you, Kelly?
Yeah. And that's been an unraveling. Again, the knowingness has always been there. Like the, oh, poor you has kind of been there, but the awareness behind it has always been, ew, they don't need your pity. You're crawling in the pit with them. How can you serve them if you're in there? So I do no service by joining them on that journey, and I can be more intimate with them by not joining them on that journey. And so that's the place that the love comes from, is don't get in the pit, stay here and love them there like you were held. And that's where we become the healer. Because again, all of this is energy. And so my vibrational ability to allow that to come through me as a vessel is never shifting up or down. It's just an open pipeline for the work of God to get through. If I join them in the pit, I'm just as bad as they are in the story of suffering.
Al?
There is two books written by a Dr. John Lerma. He was a physician who worked in Texas in a hospice doctor. He's a hospice doctor. And he wrote two books, one called Into the Light and one called Learning from the Light. And each of those books he wrote about what he learned from the dying. These people were of all religions. Some of them had no religion, but they saw in their rooms angels. They talked to dead loved ones. They knew things. He writes 2 books about it. Very interesting books. I highly recommend them. But they were special because they could see. And I don't mean this seeing, I mean they could see. So I think they saw you as divine because of where they were in their life. My second interpretation of the incident was what you alluded to before. You said the word. I think the second 2 people that you met were maybe angelic, but I think the first person, and you said the word demonic. I think that's a possibility because even in the Bible, Jesus comes upon some people who are possessed. He throws them out of their body. They go into some swine, and the swine jump off a cliff. I think that girl might have been demonic. I think even demons can see divinity. She saw you, and she said, "I see you too." So those are when I saw those are the 2 interpretations I had. They can be off the wall, but that's the gut feeling I had. I want to know what you think about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do a lot of work with hospice patients, and I agree. I hear it all the time. My grandmother's here, the train's here, the veil has pulled away. They seem to have 1 foot here, 1 foot there. My dad has stage 4 dementia right now, and I very much know he's living that. I have conversations with him, his higher self, and I know that 1 foot's already having that experience of the other side, and he's seeking permission to make the full movement. So from a spiritual perspective, absolutely agree on that point. But then I come back to the realization that he's never been separate from me, and I need his character to play that part, right? And so that's the piece that this always comes back to. The piece on demonic, I can't find the demonic anymore. I know we want to attribute the characteristics we've been raised with, believing that there's good, bad, right, wrong, etc. And I understand what you're saying, so I don't want to make it sound like I'm discounting that at all. But in this play, I find God in everything. Okay. So when they said, "I see you," to me, I now realize that is the God source of all of this, just wanting me to connect to the realization that I'm not separate. That's what I see you is for me. Gotcha. I see you. I am. The I am is what's speaking, not the identity of the Asian girl with cystic fibrosis who's veiling to the other side. Now, this is where, and I certainly don't want to ever make anybody feel like they're doing a disservice. So I'm only speaking for myself here. I want to put that little caveat in. This is where I feel like a lot of folks who go into spiritual work discount themselves. They get to a place where their spiritual unraveling happens, where the gifts have exposed themselves, which we all have access to in infinite wisdom. And the gifts are so fun that they think this is the end. I'm psychic. I'm a healer. But that's only one segment. But many get stuck there because it's a fun place. Unicorns and, spirits and getting to connect others to the dead or help others with the healing. That's only the first plateau. There are no hierarchies, but if I were to have to put it into a translatable kind of tangible thing here in our realm, many get stuck there. Again, I don't want to discount anyone because we're all serving the exact purpose of what we're doing. So there's no right or wrong in it. But I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. So all of a sudden I'm back and I seem to be psychic, channel, medium, medical intuitive, all these fun tools and toys. And it would have been very easy to just slip into that life, throw a website out there and make millions of dollars doing that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But something in me knew there was more. Don't get stuck there. Don't let that become your thing. That's just one of the things. Throw it in your trunk of your car and keep going, girl. There's more. There's more. And so that to me is what the ICU was. Don't stop. You're not any of this. There is no end. The unraveling continues. The game of Mario gets a new screen. The barrels keep rolling. The bananas keep dropping. Don't stop, girl. Keep going. And that's what I've done. So the ICU to me was an invitation to keep going.
Wouldn't you be really describing the ego? In other words, looking at myself, I wrote, okay, I'm an artist. I did these things. I wrote a musical. I got my musical done. Now I'm trying to get it out there. And in my trying to get it out there, I've so accepted this role as Doug, the guy who wrote this musical, that I'm actually suffering for it because my identity is so wrapped around the idea that I'm trying to get it out there. And I'll give myself miserable days. I had a bad week last week where I'm like, I can't get anywhere with this, and I need to get this out there. And you know, I'm waiting for my friend to get my contract done, and that's dragging. And it's like all of a sudden, there's this wrapped up identity of Doug as if he's this person,
the doer. I call it the doer. Yeah.
The doer, right? The doer, Doug, and he's struggling with this whole thing. And so it's our ego, and my son and I talk about this a lot. My son is really hardworking guy. He's the greatest kid in the world. He's working hard, and he's having so many hard days, long hours, 6 a.m. till 9, 10 o'clock at night. He just can't seem to get off the computer or the phone, and we're all struggling with this through identity. It's ego identity. It's human doers. This is my job. This is what I gave my, what I got a sheepskin for, or what I have a website that represents me for. And this is where we all entangle ourselves, isn't it? This is where we all pretty much trap ourselves.
Absolutely. Yet the dualistic side of that is there's always discomfort in the body.
Yeah.
The GPS is always saying, you're working on the dream in the dream. You're in the dream, trying to work on the dream. Breathe, don't resist. What is here? As that space is given more, just a tiny little willingness, the momentum can grab you. Right. And it's happening for you. And that's where the synchronicities and the miracles happen. And the next Mario screen drops and the perfect person walks in synchronistically and says, hey, let me get your book out there. You've done so much. Let me see what I can do for you. Let me this, let me that. We say we've created these synchronicities, but they've always been dropping right here. We just can't see them because we're looking at the finger pointing to the moon. The moon was always there. So the ICU to me, again, was pointing back to never lose sight that you are and think that you are that. Because girl, that's just not it. Not even remotely. And we seem to need the suffering sometimes to let the cracks get through. And that's okay too. So let it sit, let it let go. And then what happens is more of that opening, more of that opening, more of that opening. But we absolutely can seem to sit in a space where we believe we are this, and that'll be our experience. Now, if I tie this back to no free will, which people always want me to do, because they hear me say that and they're like, well, that contradicts what you said. There's no free will. And I said, well, that would contradict it if you were in a linear brain. But if you're not in a linear brain, you can see that if there's a problem, the solution's also right there, just based on the fact that this is dualistic, right? So it only seems like that little sliver in between the problem and the solution is the opportunity for the light to get in. The more we seem to be able to squeeze ourselves in there, that expands and the synchronicities are seen, but they've always been there. We call it manifesting. We call it being a creator. And I say, but you've always been that. You just forgot for a minute, and that's okay. Welcome home.
It reminds me a little bit of, and I can't exactly quote it from the Bible, but it's something that has to do with if you just had a mustard seed of faith. Mm-hmm. And the mustard seed is about the smallest seed of any kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's told to us that if we only had that little tiny little thing to open that crack in you of
yep.
how, you know, that gives you enough light to then jump over. And fortunately, I don't have every week like I had last week, but I have these weeks that come on, and you know, we view ourselves as aging. That means we have a timer on us. Oh, if I have a timer on me, I don't want to make it in Broadway at 85. I want to make it at 66 or 67 because I have a picture of how much fun it's going to be. And I have a picture of what that kind of celebration would be like. And you know what I'm saying? And that it's that timer and that pressure on so many people to, I want to get this done by the time I'm 30, I want to have this done. And by the time I'm 40, and this ties us into that linear trap that we all seem to live.
Yeah, and there's so many ways to get yourself out of that, but there has to be that mustard seed to let those, the inner self, the seed of the self to be heard and to be the louder voice. And I say to people, that's where breathe and don't resist comes in. Even if you just take a second and do that breath, that mustard seed is getting nourished in that moment. And there's possibility where Bernadette calls it inspired action can thrust forward. We say, I had an inspired thought. Well, okay, maybe God put that there, and maybe you are God. And maybe you don't start with that realization, but that inspired opportunity or action then builds momentum because you woke up and you spilled coffee on your shirt, but you took a moment to breathe and not resist. And all of a sudden the thought is just go take a drive for a few minutes or your whole day is going to be like this. That's the inspired action. We call it ours, but it's your I see you moment. You're bigger than this. Move away from that energy and let us show you all of these miracles that are falling at your feet. And I do this all the time in life. You know, I will just walk away and say, I'm going to walk away and watch that solve itself. And it always does.
Yeah, I'm speechless.
I feel you, girl. I feel you. I do. And you know, the love in this space is what you guys have done here is beautiful. Keep doing it. And I will say this, and I need you to hear this from your heart. This is not Kelly speaking. The toothpaste doesn't go back in the tube. This is a moment you each will walk away from with the energy of God thriving more heartily inside of you. And that is not anything to do with Kelly. In fact, I feel chills all over my body because that's a message coming through me. The toothpaste doesn't go back in the tube. This moment is a shift for all of us in this space. And I think we all feel that. So thank you.
Now I'm choked up. Al?
Unfortunately for everybody, I am not speechless.
I love you.
Thank you. This is going to be a crazy question. I hold it to last. Kelly, you are our 5th interviewee, and all our prior guests, Terry, Nancy, and Sev, are authors of books about UFOs, abductions, flying saucers, that genre. And almost every discussion every week, we get on topics like reincarnation, afterlife, pre-life planning. We touch on them all. And to me, they shouldn't be connected, but darn it, they are. Now,
Absolutely.
I want to know from you if you have anything to add to that. You're shaking your head, and I'm enthusiastic about that because I want to know what you know, what you've learned about the combination, and why do you think it's true?
It's all true.
What do you know that about that topic that might be new to us?
If we can conceive of it, it's here. Unicorns, UFOs, all of it, right? It all comes from the same place.
Any experience in any of your readings from your clients about that?
Oh, absolutely. There's a huge Palladian connection for me. I also have found seeds in my body. I was just pulling at my ear because recently I found a seed. I'm not even kidding you guys. Literally the other day I found a seed in my earlobe. I don't know if you can see. Oh, I guarantee I'm being played with at some level to understand. I know this is going to sound weird to you probably because it would have sounded weird.
You're in this group, so
yeah. You would have thought that I would say, no, you've asked about this, but to me, it's weird. I've never asked what you're doing with me. I've never been concerned about it. I've never had a fear of it. There's always been an openness to it. Now that I'm asking about it, I'll get a download. So soon enough, there'll be a video coming through Bernadette about this very topic.
Good.
Is it happening? Absolutely. Is it something to be fearful about? No. Has it been going on forever? Yes. Are we the only beings here? What an egoic thought. We are all of this and none of it at the same time. God wants experience. You are that. Why wouldn't we have aliens? Why wouldn't we have UFOs? Why wouldn't we have abductions? Why wouldn't we have vampires? Why wouldn't we have anything you can conceive of? And I love, this is really funny. Recently, one of my clients sent me Jed McKenna's first book, and I had never read any of his books. I've always been kind of entertained by his image of nobody. If you're not familiar with Jed McKenna, he goes into the whole Advaita thing. And he calls himself an enlightened guy, but it's satire because in the whole unraveling of his book, he's basically laughing at himself in realization that he's none of it and all of it at the same time. So he's just kind of moving through the day like, what's going to appear? Oh, a vampire. What's going to appear? Oh, a UFO. Like when you are us, and please do not think I'm calling myself enlightened. To me, what enlightened is this moment has a light on, because enlightenment is not something we obtain. It's what we are. So Jed McKenna also sees it from that perception. And so he's just moving through his day like, oh, there's a vampire. Oh, there's a UFO. Oh, there's an awakened person. Oh, there's this. So yes, it's all part of this. There's nothing I say no to.
I just wanted my first book is UFOs, but my second book is way beyond the UFOs. It's preordained, and a lot of what you were saying, being puppets and everything is preordained.
Mm-hmm.
The high strangeness
Yeah.
going through right now, I've gone so far beyond. It's what happens to hardcore experiencers once we've been there for a long time. And
Yeah.
my life is a book, and every
I wrote it.
yes,
And I wrote
we're writing exactly the past, present, future, all the same. Yes, so much
we
of
call it synchronicity, right? We say, oh, somebody gave me that book. What a beautiful synchronicity. No, you wrote it. You left it for yourself. And you said, I'll pick it up at that time when I'm banging my head against the wall. And then I'll claim credit for it. And I'll laugh about how it's a deja vu moment. Well, the deja vu is, oh, you wrote this silly and you left it here because you knew you were going to be frustrated and you were going to need it right now. And your Mario screen said, here's your banana. Finger points to moon.
yeah, I experienced samadhi, and without intention. So,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
much of what you were saying resonated with me.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're very welcome. And this will stir, like I said, the toothpaste can't go back in the tube. So I look forward to hearing each of your experiences after this. And again, I take zero credit. So please know that. I get as excited to hear what happens after this too, because it literally is God's work. And you are that.
Is there anything that you think as a book just seems to encompass what you have experienced or now know? Or hope that's not an egotistical question.
No, it's not. I mean, like you guys, the character of Kelly stumbles on the right thing at the right time, right? The key to the castle or the banana in the Mario story shows up right when I need it. The difference is I just don't claim it as a coincidence. I just know that I left that for myself, and there's the cue card, and here's the part I'm going to play today. And there's just no identification with it being anything other than part of the play. So there's, we get exactly what we need. The Buddha is at our feet. I just don't say this is a bigger Buddha than that. When I'm scrubbing the toilet, that is my miracle in that moment. So I think it's just showing up to whatever it is and saying, this is the miracle. I'm here with the toilet brush and the Ajax, and I am with God. And I am going to just put my head right in there and love up on it. And I think that's where we get tripped up, is we think again, I point back to the energy of it. We call this energy more special because it's beautiful and the heart thrives there, but the heart can thrive equally in that toilet, I promise.
The Course in Miracles talks about special loves, a speciality love. And like you choose a mate and you're like, oh, I love you. And it becomes a speciality as if you don't love everyone else, as if you don't love your neighbor or another person that you have no involvement with. And that special love is pointing to an incorrect perception. Whereas love is more like, and I think I remember, it's sort of like the sun shines and you stand in the sun. It's like it's all encompassing. And to close it off and say, I'm only going to love you, you're my particular special love now that I've chosen, is an incorrect perception according to the Course in Miracles.
Yeah, I mean, unconditional love is truly that. We call it that, but very few people actually live unconditional love, because unconditional love is so unconditional. It's even loving when it's not loved.
Course of Miracles. The Course of Miracles in 3 parts, and the longest part, the one you're supposed to read every day, is so difficult to migrate through. I can't believe it. It was through Jesus.
So I'll give you the cliff note.
Good.
Unlearn everything you know.
Okay.
That's what the Course in Miracles is intended to do. This is not a chair. This table is not a chair. This table is not a table. This chair is not a chair. What the Course of Miracles intended to do, but again, human ego complicated it, is to unravel. From the moment we're born, you are a girl. Your name is Kelly. These are your parents. Sorry, Milo's panting, and I'm sure you're picking all that up, so I apologize. It is an unraveling that is the intention. So what you're intended to do through the Course of Miracles is each day unravel a perception you've identified with to make something separate from you. You can do it much more simply by
Right.
walking around and just simply saying, there I am being that.
Kelly, I wanted to thank you. I think the dog is panting, and we're keeping you to 6 o'clock. That's 2 full hours. I'm certainly not chasing you off. I'm just asking you to say whether you want to get going or hang for a little while. It's up to you. Thank you.
I have
Yes.
to go.
All right.
Bye. Enjoy your
Thank you,
grandson.
Kelly, Sev, Doug, Terry. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, Al. Thank you very much. Al.